Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's take up the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at a column from page number 6 of the Delhi edition. This column, written by one of India's former foreign secretary, evaluates the impact of Brexit and how it continues to divide the United Kingdom and Europe even after 5 years of the 2016 referendum. See, the term Brexit refers to the exit of Britain from the European Union. Brexit was essentially a political movement in the United Kingdom to pull out UK from the European Union, and for this purpose, a referendum was held in 2016. A referendum is a type of a direct election where the people cast a vote to decide upon crucial matters. By 2016, strong anti Euro sentiments had taken root in the United Kingdom as the proponents believed that the United Kingdom was contributing more to the European Union than it was receiving in return. And based on this, a strong political movement had taken root to pull out the UK from the European Union. See, the European Union is a political, economic, and monetary union that brings together 27 member states to form one of the world's largest trading blocs. The European Union and its predecessor organization, the European Economic Community, they not only brought together several European countries, but they also helped in putting an end to centuries old rivalry between European nations. It created a platform for political and economic integration of the European continent, and by establishing a free trade area, it removed all the barriers to trade, and as well as with regard to movement of people, goods and services, and as well as investments. It allowed the member states to adopt a common set of policies, and eventually, some of the EU members even adopted a common currency, that is the euro, thus establishing it as a monetary union as well. But Britain, ever since it became a member of the EU and its predecessor organization, the European Economic Community, back in the 1970s, it has always had several issues with the grouping. The United Kingdom had issues with regard to the extent of financial contribution that it was expected to make towards the grouping. It also had issues with regard to the common policies and regulatory frameworks, including those related to the free movement of people, goods, services, and investments. On these grounds, strong anti Euro sentiments were promoted, which eventually led to a political movement that was seeking for Brexit, that is, the exit of Britain from the European Union. Finally, in July 2016, the Brexit referendum was held, and a majority of the people of the United Kingdom voted in favor of Brexit, that is, to pull out UK from the European Union. Thus began the complicated, long drawn out exit process of Britain from the EU. Following the referendum, as per the provisions of Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty, which governs the European Union, the exit process was initiated. But to complete the formal exit process, a deal became essential between UK and the European Union in order to prevent UK crashing out from the European Union. If UK were to quit the EU without a deal, it would completely disrupt the political and economic relations between the EU member states and the United Kingdom, and such a hard exit was expected to have a huge impact on the regional and global economy. So, in order to prevent this from happening, the leaders of the European Union and the United Kingdom began negotiating an exit deal in order to provide for a smooth transition and a soft exit. But this process dragged on for several years due to complicated negotiations involved in the exit process and due to the refusal of both the parties to concede any ground. And as a result, it took more than 4 years to complete and formalize this exit process. In the meantime, the United Kingdom witnessed two general elections and multiple prime ministers came and went, but still the deal was nowhere in sight. Eventually, in January 2020, Britain crashed out of the European Union after buying some time to negotiate a trade agreement. Finally, the Withdrawal and Trade Cooperation Agreement was worked out last year in December, and it has come into force from January 2021. So this has completed Britain's formal exit from the European Union, accompanied with a trade deal. But even 5 years after the referendum, the issues continue to persist, and the controversial nature of Brexit continues to divide United Kingdom and Europe. See, this withdrawal and trade agreement which was worked out provides for smoother movement of goods by regulating border controls in few parts of the United Kingdom in order to facilitate smooth trade relations with other European Union countries. But however, the terms of this arrangement and the manner in which they were negotiated has led to deep political divisions within Europe. And this makes it very clear that those who favored Brexit expected a clean and smooth break from the European Union. But clearly, 5 years later, it's very evident that they had underestimated many of the key issues. Today, as the withdrawal and trade agreement has come into place, many practical challenges have emerged in its implementation, which is threatening trade and stability in the European region, even leading to a threat to the very integrity of the United Kingdom. See, the United Kingdom or Britain is made up of four distinct territories. This includes England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. These three territories, that is Scotland, England, and Wales, are collectively referred to as Great Britain, and along with Northern Ireland, it forms the United Kingdom or Britain. So essentially, Great Britain is separated from Northern Ireland by the Irish Sea over here. And you should note that since many decades, separatist and pro-independence movements have persisted in Northern Ireland and as well as in Scotland. Then to the south of Northern Ireland, we have the Republic of Ireland, which is a separate independent sovereign nation, which happens to be a full-time member of the European Union. Prior to Brexit, both Republic of Ireland and the United Kingdom were part of the European Union, and hence the European Union's rules with regard to border controls and trade were applicable, which was facilitating the smooth movement of goods between United Kingdom and the Republic of Ireland. Because of the border control and trade rules of the European Union, a soft border had been set up between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland in order to facilitate the smooth movement of goods, people and investments and services across the two Irish territories. So Northern Ireland, which falls under the sovereignty of the United Kingdom or Britain, had witnessed a violent insurgency between the 1960s and 1990s. This violent extremist movement was seeking to liberate Northern Ireland from UK, and it was seeking to erase these borders and unite the two Irish territories. The insurgency was brought to an end through the historic Good Friday Agreement of 1998, and under the deal, the United Kingdom had agreed for the establishment of a soft border between Northern Ireland and Republic of Ireland in order to facilitate the easier movement of goods and people in return for bringing the Irish insurgency to an end. So the existence of this soft border between Northern Ireland and Republic of Ireland was crucial for peace in the region and as well as for the unity and the integrity of the United Kingdom. Now that both the countries, that is United Kingdom and the Republic of Ireland, were members of the European Union prior to Brexit, there was smooth flow of goods and people across the Irish border, and there was no need for any border control mechanisms in the Irish Sea. So prior to Brexit, goods were being easily dispatched from Great Britain, that is from Scotland, England and Wales, and they were being sent across the Irish Sea into Northern Ireland, and from here, these goods were also reaching Republic of Ireland across the soft border. But now, post-Brexit, since United Kingdom quit the European Union, these four territories which made up the United Kingdom, they became non-European Union members. Whereas Republic of Ireland, on the other hand, continues to remain a member of the EU as it is an independent sovereign nation. So this emerging distinction brought back the question of establishing hard border control mechanisms between Northern Ireland and Republic of Ireland, because now Northern Ireland would no longer be a part of the European Union. But such a hard border was not acceptable to the people of Northern Ireland and as well as to the people of Republic of Ireland. And hence, to resolve this issue, United Kingdom and the European Union worked out the Northern Ireland Protocol to continue the soft border arrangement even after UK quit the European Union. So this protocol has enabled the continuance of the soft border between Northern Ireland and Republic of Ireland. But however, between the Irish territories and Great Britain, a trade barrier has emerged all across the Irish Sea, because right now the goods that are being sent from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, they will have to be inspected over here at the custom checkpoints because goods of Great Britain cannot enter Republic of Ireland through the soft border present over here, that is via Northern Ireland. So this practical challenge has created issues for the movement of meat products and other essential goods and items, thereby raising several trade issues which is affecting trade and stability in the region. See, right now the issue is that politically Northern Ireland continues to remain a part of the United Kingdom and Northern Ireland is firmly under the sovereignty of Britain. But despite being a non-EU territory, Northern Ireland continues to remain a part of the free trade area of the European Union because of the Northern Ireland Protocol. While goods originating from Northern Ireland can freely move across into European Union territories such as Republic of Ireland, the same facility is not available to goods originating from Great Britain. So this creates a requirement for border control measures along the Irish Sea or along the ports of Northern Ireland, where the goods coming from Great Britain can be checked before they move on to Republic of Ireland. Because the European Union has very strict rules with regard to several products, especially meat products, and they will have to be thoroughly checked if it is entering EU region from a non-EU region. So for the United Kingdom, the emergence of a trade barrier in the Irish Sea and the emergence of a hard border control between Great Britain and Northern Ireland is unacceptable as it threatens the very integrity and stability of the UK. UK has reasons to fear that Irish insurgency might be revived or the separatist demands might be revived, seeking to unite Northern Ireland with Republic of Ireland. So there are no easy solutions over here to resolve this issue. And meanwhile, in Scotland, pro-independence movement has been gaining ground again following Brexit, because even during the referendum, majority of the Scots, they had voted against Brexit, and today there is still a strong desire in Scotland to quit the United Kingdom and join the free trade area with the European Union. Because if Scotland manages to do that, if it manages to break away from the sovereignty of United Kingdom, and if it manages to enter into a free trade agreement with the EU countries, it will be given several concessions, including the status of a least developed country, which will bring enormous economic benefits for Scotland with regard to its trade with the EU region. So in short, the practical challenges created by Brexit and the unresolved issues that exist, they have threatened the very unity and integrity of the United Kingdom. And it also continues to have a huge economic impact on the United Kingdom. According to the IMF, the economy of the United Kingdom has declined by 10% of its GDP last year, and its overall food and drink exports to the EU region has fallen by a massive 50%. The United Kingdom, which is a major hub for services, has also seen a major decline in the export of services to the EU region, and UK, which specializes in financial and legal services, has taken a major hit due to some of the practical challenges that have emerged in the implementation of the exit deal. The logistical and bureaucratic issues that have been created, along with border management and regulatory issues, has increased the paperwork involved in the movement of people, goods, services and investment. And these complications has already pushed around 500 British companies to relocate to other European capitals. Apart from this political and economic impact for the UK, political divisions have emerged in Europe between UK and France and Germany. While France and Germany are the leading powers of the European Union, they have been completely unhappy with the manner in which the United Kingdom has exited EU, and this has resulted in the emergence of tensions in their relations. The latest issue regarding the export of meat from Great Britain to Northern Ireland has even resulted in a naval standoff between the British Navy and the French Navy, as the EU countries are seeking to impose a blockade in the Irish Sea to check the goods that are coming from Great Britain into Northern Ireland. But Britain finds this unacceptable as it threatens the integrity of the UK, and hence diplomatic and military tensions are rising, and this was very much evident during the latest G7 summit, which was hosted by the UK. So in conclusion, even 5 years after Brexit, the divisions continue both within UK and in Europe, that those who favored Brexit, they failed to fully take into account the practical challenges that would emerge in its implementation. Now let's take up an article from page number 1, which helps us understand the doctrine of chilling effect in the context of free speech. See, this topic is in news because a petitioner has approached the Supreme Court asking it to re-examine its judgment in the Kedarnath case of 1962, in which the Supreme Court had upheld the constitutional validity of the sedition law as provided under Section 124A of the Indian Penal Code. See, on the 18th of May, we had discussed in detail the controversy surrounding India's sedition law. We had understood that this colonial era provision seeks to target any seditious activity against the government, which includes any conduct, any speech or writings that could result in the incitement of violence and rebellion against the state. It deals with any activities that promote disaffection towards the government and contempt towards the government. But the problem with this provision is that the definitions and terms are very broad and vaguely defined, and as a result, it became a tool in the hands of the colonial government and as well as in the hands of the post-independence government to target free speech, dissent and opposition by misusing this law. The broad vague definitions under Section 124A allows for its wide application, which according to critics has enabled the violation of free speech, which is a guaranteed fundamental right under Article 19. This controversial law has been challenged on the grounds of its constitutionality several times, but in 1962, the Supreme Court had upheld the constitutional validity of Section 124A in the historic Kedarnath case. So now a petitioner has approached the Supreme Court asking it to re-examine its judgment in the Kedarnath case because back in 1962, the doctrine of chilling effect with regard to free speech hadn't evolved as yet in India and as well as around the world. The doctrine of chilling effect became a part of legal jurisprudence first in the United States in the mid-1960s, that is in the period between 1965 and 1967, which was well after the Kedarnath ruling of the Supreme Court, which was delivered in 1962. So the petitioner is asking the Supreme Court to re-examine the Kedarnath judgment and apply the doctrine of chilling effect to the sedition law in order to declare this controversial provision as unconstitutional. See, as you know, the fundamental right to free speech guaranteed under Article 19 comes with a set of reasonable restrictions. In a democracy, free speech is non-negotiable, but however, it can be restricted on reasonable grounds as per the restrictions provided in the Constitution, provided if this restriction stands the test of law. Now, the problem with Section 124A is that its broad and vague definitions results in its wider application in order to satisfy the test of reasonable restriction, thus allowing governments to stifle free speech, dissent and opposition by misusing the sedition law. But the judiciaries around the world and as well as in India have evolved the concept of chilling effect or the doctrine of chilling effect since the mid-1960s in order to tackle those laws which provide for broad and vague definitions that are stifling free speech. Chilling effect is the stifling of legitimate free speech through the application of excessively broad and vague laws. It is essentially the unwanted prohibition of free speech due to the fear of criminal sanction. It means that there could be broad and vague legislations which may not directly affect free speech, but however, they indirectly promote self-censorship. Because the broad and vague definitions provided in this law, accompanied with strict penalties and strict punishment, acts as a deterrence against free speech, thereby pushing individuals to adopt self-censorship before they say anything or before they write anything. Now, if you look at Section 124A of the IPC, it provides for very strict penalties and punishment, with the maximum punishment being life imprisonment, and all offences are treated as cognizable and non-bailable. When such strict penalties and punishments exist, and when there are broad and vague provisions in the law, citizens will automatically start fearing the law, thereby imposing self-censorship on themselves. So this is referred to as chilling effect. That is, these laws, they do not directly prohibit free speech, but indirectly they have a chilling effect on free speech. So in such cases, the judiciary invokes the doctrine of chilling effect and declares those laws to be unconstitutional. This doctrine was first recognized in the United States in 1965, where the judiciary recognized the chilling effect of broad and vague laws on free speech and stated that such laws have a deterrent impact which indirectly restricts free speech. So, in order to protect this key fundamental right, it would be essential for the judiciary to declare such broad, vague laws as unconstitutional by invoking the doctrine of chilling effect. This doctrine was first recognized in India in the R. Rajgopal vs. State of Tamil Nadu case and as well as in the S. Kushbu vs. Kanniyamal case. But the doctrine of chilling effect has been given a more structured recognition within the Indian legal system through the historic judgment of the Supreme Court in the Shreya Singhal case of 2015. In this landmark judgment, the Supreme Court declared Section 66A of the IT Act to be unconstitutional by invoking the doctrine of chilling effect. The Supreme Court ruled that Section 66A of the IT Act is very broad and vague and it indirectly inhibits free speech. So by invoking this doctrine, this controversial provision of the IT Act was declared to be unconstitutional in the Shreya Singhal case. Now let's look at a few smaller articles that are important in today's newspaper. We have this column on page number 7 in which the writer takes a stand against astrology and declares it to be a pseudoscience. This topic is in news because recently IGNOU, or the Indira Gandhi National Open University, has taken a controversial decision to introduce a degree course in astrology. Astrology is the study of planetary positions and horoscopes, which apparently somehow influence human life. The writer correctly points out that astrology is nothing but pseudoscience, which exploits the vulnerability of the human mind, and there is no scientific basis for the principles and teachings of astrology. He points out that astrology assumes that somehow planetary positions during our time of birth apparently influence our lives and thereby offers future prediction through horoscopes and even remedies for problems faced in one's life. The writer clearly dismisses this branch of study as pseudoscience, as there is no scientific basis for astrology, and he points out that there is a world of difference between astrology and astrophysics. Astrophysics is the scientific study of the universe, which has not only emerged as a robust scientific discipline in the modern world, but there are even historical references in ancient and medieval India regarding the science of astrophysics. But astrology, on the other hand, is nothing but pseudoscience, which is attempting to exploit the vulnerability of human mind by claiming to predict the path of one's life and by claiming to offer solutions to the challenges. So in this context, the writer raises questions on the status of education in the country and the role of scientific temperament in our education system, and even points out that this decision of IGNOU to introduce a course on astrology goes against the principles of the Indian Constitution and calls upon the citizens to develop scientific temper and spirit of inquiry under Article 51A, which is nothing but your fundamental duties. This provision was introduced into the Constitution through the 42nd Amendment Act of 1976, and as a part of fundamental duties under Article 51A, citizens are expected to develop scientific temper and the spirit of inquiry. This provision actually made India the first and only country to explicitly adopt scientific temper in its constitution. So now, the introduction of astrology courses by elite educational institutions goes against the spirit of scientific temper and against the spirit of inquiry which is nurtured by our constitution itself. Now let's take up an article from page number 5, which deals with the interstate river dispute that has emerged between Andhra Pradesh and Telangana over the sharing of the waters of the Krishna River. See, Article 262 of the Indian Constitution provides for interstate river disputes. This article provides for the adjudication of these disputes, and according to it, the Parliament may by law provide for the adjudication of any interstate river dispute with regard to the usage, distribution, or control of the waters of these interstate rivers. The article also states that notwithstanding anything in the Constitution, Parliament may by law provide that neither the Supreme Court nor any other court shall exercise jurisdiction in respect of any such interstate river disputes. Meaning, Article 262 prohibits the Supreme Court or any other court from exercising jurisdiction over interstate river disputes. As per the provision, the Parliament enacted the Interstate River Water Disputes Act of 1956 just before the states were reorganized on linguistic lines. And under this law, to resolve the disputes, tribunals can be set up by the centre. So over the years, to resolve several interstate river water disputes, tribunals have been set up. And these tribunals, after hearing the arguments of all the parties, will pass a final award which happens to be binding on the member states. But however, several states have refused to abide by the awards delivered by the tribunals, and they have taken the matter further to Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court has even accepted some of these cases and extended its jurisdiction by invoking judicial review, even though Article 262 prohibits the Supreme Court and other courts from exercising jurisdiction over interstate river disputes. For example, take the Kaveri River dispute, primarily involving Karnataka and Tamil Nadu. Even after the tribunal delivered a final award, the states approached the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court accepted the case. Something similar is happening between Andhra Pradesh and Telangana as well, because after Telangana was constituted, under the Andhra Pradesh Reorganization Act of 2014, the Krishna River Management Board was set up. This water management board was supposed to issue directions with regard to the management and usage of the Krishna waters, which was supposed to be followed by both the states. But recently, Telangana has announced a few projects on the Krishna River, including a hydropower project, which according to Andhra Pradesh violates the terms of the Andhra Pradesh Reorganization Act of 2014. Andhra Pradesh has alleged that these proposed projects of Telangana will deprive the state of its legitimate share of the Krishna water for drinking and irrigation purposes, and hence it has approached the Supreme Court for relief. Next, according to this article on page number 8, India and Russia will be holding their first ever 2+2 ministerial meet before the next summit level interaction takes place between Prime Minister Modi and President Putin. See, a 2+2 ministerial meet is a unique diplomatic format under which the foreign ministers and defense ministers of both the countries interact simultaneously to discuss key security and geopolitical concerns of both the countries. India has already established such a 2+2 ministerial format with countries like United States, Japan, Australia, which are essentially the members of the quadrilateral grouping. So on similar lines, India is also looking to hold its first ever 2+2 ministerial meet with Russia to discuss mutual issues of global security and geopolitics, including the developing situation in Afghanistan, along with issues such as counter-terrorism in South Asia and Central Asia, and as well as defense relations between the two countries. The two sides are expected to step up their strategic cooperation at platforms like BRICS and the SCO, and the initiation of this 2+2 ministerial dialogue is expected to help in this regard. Now let's take up an article from page number 9. Prime Minister Modi has held a telephonic conversation with Maldivian President Ibrahim Solih. Both the leaders have taken stock of their bilateral relationship, and Prime Minister Modi has reminded Maldives that the country occupies a very important position in India's foreign policy, as it receives primary focus and attention under the Neighbourhood First policy of India, as Maldives happens to be a maritime neighbour in South Asia, and as well as under the Sagar Doctrine, which was launched by Prime Minister Modi in 2015 as a part of India's outreach towards the Indian Ocean region. Under the Sagar Doctrine, India has promised security and growth for all in the region, and this foreign policy doctrine of India is primarily focused on the IOR countries such as Maldives, Mauritius, Seychelles, etc. As Maldives occupies a strategic location in the Indian Ocean, India has built very strong defense relations with this island country, and India also plays a key role in supporting the Maldivian economy. India has even been investing heavily in Maldives to create essential infrastructure, and it has announced a line of credit to support the Greater Malay Connectivity Project to connect the capital of Maldives, that is Malé, with neighboring islands through bridges and as well as through aerial and sea routes. India is also largely responsible for safeguarding the exclusive economic zone of Maldives, and the Indian Navy and the Coast Guard play a key role in supporting the Maldivian defense forces. India has even stationed defense and military assets in Maldives by donating helicopters and reconnaissance aircraft such as the ALH and Dhruv in order to strengthen the defense and security of Maldives. But of late, these relations have come under strain as a result of growing anti-India sentiments, which has led to a targeted online campaign against Indian presence and influence in Maldives. These developments have caused concern for India, and hence the Prime Minister has held a conversation with the Maldivian President to take stock of their bilateral relations. Now let's take up the mains practice questions. The first question: Brexit continues to divide Europe even 5 years after the referendum. Analyze. The second question: Examine the doctrine of chilling effect on free speech in the Indian context. Kindly write an answer to these questions and post your answers in the comment section below. So this concludes our discussion for today. Thanks for watching.